In the year 1920, a young Bengali named Uday Shankar Chowdhury sailed from Bombay to England for higher studies in painting. Towards the close of the 19th century, Uday Shankar's father, Shankar, had migrated to Rajputana, presently Rajasthan, from the holy city of Benares. Shankar, an erudite scholar, was appointed as a tutor to the Prince Bhupal Singh of Udaipur and settled down comfortably there with his wife Hemangini. 3 years later, on 8th of December 1900, their first child, a son, was born in this house in Udaipur. They named him Uday Shankar after this historic city of his birth. 3 of the 7 sons of Shankar died at young ages. Of those who survived after Uday came Rajendra, Devendra, and Robindra. Shankar again shifted from Udaipur to Jhalwar, another princely state in Rajasthan, and came close to its royal family. The constant shifting left Uday with very little interest in studies. He rather enjoyed climbing trees and chasing birds and squirrels. Mata Din, a tribal dancer, made a strong impression on child Uday's sensitive mind. Whenever Shankar went abroad with the Maharaja of Jhalwar, his family went to stay in Benares with Hemangini's father. It was rather suddenly that young Uday was seized with a fancy for drawing. Though he received no tutoring in this art, he drew all over the walls of the house with a piece of charcoal in his hand. But little encouragement came from his grandfather, Abhay Charan, who was a terror to Uday. A most significant development now took place in young Uday's life. His drawing master at school, Ambika Charan Mukherjee, had been observing Uday Shankar's drawings with increasing interest, and being a man of unusual understanding, he was convinced that the boy needed to be encouraged. Slowly but surely, Ambika Charan was able to completely win over Uday.
प्रभु तुम्हार पाने तुम्हार पाने तुम्हार पाने.
He helped Uday discover an entirely new world. Young Uday learnt painting, music, photography, and even magic from Ambika Charan. Eager to develop his talent in painting, Shankar sent Uday to the J.J. School of Art in Bombay for a 3-year diploma course. Uday Shankar completed his course at the J.J. School of Art in July 1920, and all on a sudden, in August, he left India to join his father in London. At the Royal College of Art in London, Uday studied all forms of painting taught there and was doing extremely well. His teacher, Sir William Rothenstein, did not want his talent to be thus dissipated. "You are taking our disease to India," lamented Rothenstein, who knew India quite well and insisted that Uday go to the British Museum to discover the greatness and beauty of India. A whole month went by. When Uday returned to the college, he could hardly lift his brush. Occasionally, Uday used to give magic shows publicly in London for sheer fun. Just as Uday was about to leave for Rome on a British scholarship on painting, when quite by chance he met the fabled Russian ballerina Anna Pavlova. So momentous was her influence that almost overnight Uday switched from painting to dancing without any formal training in dance whatsoever. Within a short time thereafter, Uday Shankar appeared on London stage with Anna Pavlova in Krishna and Radha. After a tour of America with Pavlova, Shankar left her company and tried to do something on his own. He had given up painting and had no intentions of reviving his interest in it. All he wanted to do was to dance. But London was not sympathetic to Shankar. It had nothing more to offer him. Uday Shankar went to Paris, and from there he toured most of Europe with one or two dance partners for over 5 years. It was not easy, but he braved it all, entirely on his own. In his early Paris period, Shankar used to dance in cabarets and music halls for sheer survival. He later wrote, "I was obliged to perform in rotten, dirty haunts where all night long people were drinking and enjoying themselves. I cannot imagine what all I had to go through. But now I think it was a great thing in my life, for I came to know show business in the raw." One night in Paris, as he had nothing much to do, Uday Shankar discovered in a book presented to him by the scholar aesthete Ananda Kumaraswamy a picture of Nataraj, the dancing Shiva. He was transfixed by it. Gazing at it, he felt an irrepressible urge to try out the pose. And Shankar danced the whole night through, inventing movements which he later used in a number of his compositions. It was about this time that Shankar met Simone Barbier, a pretty 16-year-old pianist. And as Shankar had no regular musician, he engaged Simone to accompany him. But almost before either realized it, she quit the piano and became Shankar's dance mate. Shankar named Simone Simki. And the two made a legendary team for nearly 20 years and created dance history. The company then went on a world tour. Wherever Uday Shankar appeared, he triumphed. One reason why was that he was bringing a hitherto unknown exotic fare to the audiences in these countries that was presented neatly and effectively. But equally potent was Shankar's own glorious personality. Performing the simplest of steps, he could stand out as a superhuman, godlike figure. After 2 years of constant traveling and performing abroad, the Uday Shankar Company came to India in 1933. The Indian tour was managed by Horen Ghosh, the unparalleled Indian impresario. In Calcutta, Shankar met the great Kathakali master Shankaran Nambudiri, whom he had first seen perform at Trivandrum. If there was anyone whom Uday Shankar acknowledged as his guru in dance, it was Shankaran Nambudiri. Shankaran helped Shankar compose Kartikeya, which became one of Uday Shankar's most popular solos. In Calcutta, Rabindranath Tagore attended one of his shows and invited him to Shantiniketan. In 1934, Uday Shankar visited Dartington Hall, a cultural centre near London. And from here, he got the idea and the backing of Mr. Leonard Elmhurst, founder of Dartington Hall, to start a culture centre in India. His daughter, Beatrice, emerged as yet another woman, another propelling power in Uday Shankar's life. The marathon tour that lasted 7 years brought him and his country untold glory. And now, Uday Shankar came back to India to start his own centre at Almora, which was known as Uday Shankar India Culture Centre. It is of some importance to recognize that the training program at Almora Centre did not include the teaching of a single dance to the students. They were trained only to be dancers, but they had to search within themselves to create their own vocabulary and composition when they danced. Uday Shankar never liked imitators. His most stupendous creation at Almora was the Ram Leela ballet in shadow play. Ram Leela was created as a gigantic spectacle staged in the natural amphitheatre and witnessed by over 6,000 local villagers. Amula Nundi, who was trained by Uday Shankar earlier in Europe, joined him at Almora. And in 1942, they were married.
Well, as a matter of fact, Almora was a unique place because of the surrounding. Nothing could be better in India than the surrounding of Himalaya. Then, with that natural surroundings came gathered all the stalwarts, topmost of Indian dance music. Whereas Guru Shankaram Namodripad, the greatest of the classical dance Kathakali, there was Guru Amobi Singh from Manipur. He was the greatest of Manipuri dancers. Then there was Guru Kandappa Pillai, who taught Bala Saraswati. He was there to teach Bharatanatyam. And of course, for music, Alauddin Khan. So it was really a sacred place to see all these godlike teachers together. And most wonderful thing is that though Shankar was much younger to them, but still he was like the pulse of the whole thing. Everything sort of moved around him. Sometimes gurus used to take class and they used to come and watch Mr. Shankar taking class. And I remember Guru Amobi Singh says, he hasn't come here to teach, he has come to learn how to teach. Shankar had the unique method of teaching. He did not impose on them. He just brought out what was within them. That is the technique, beauty of his teaching. That he did not make dancers, but he created dancers. They were just asked to walk, and through that simple walk, there was that alertness of body and mind, there was a concentration, there was how to achieve allure, how to radiate the personality. All these things is required to be a good dancer. And not only good dancer, to be a good human being, to be a good leader, to be a good teacher. So these things helped the students to get the best of dancing.
But the center had to be closed after a little over 4 years, mainly because of lack of funds and management. Shankar was a changed man, and this he owed to Simki. He no longer haunted shady dens and sleazy joints. Shankar began to look brighter, think brighter, feel brighter. When he was performing with Simki, there came into Shankar's life another woman who gave him new directions and fresh impetus. She was the Swiss painter and sculptress Alice Boner. Alice inspired Shankar to go back to India for bringing dancers and musicians with instruments to offer his Western audience the real thing. She also volunteered to accompany him to India. Uday Shankar and Alice Boner traveled all over India, visiting temples and caves, saw many dances, classical, folk and tribal. At a temple festival in Kerala, they had their first exposure to Kathakali dance, which left Uday Shankar speechless with admiration. For music, they collected a fantastic array of instruments, including a large variety of drums, gongs and cymbals. In Calcutta, while giving a few solo performances, Uday Shankar came in contact with Timir Baran.
প্রধান ঘটনা আরম্ভ হচ্ছে 1930 সাল থেকে, কিন্তু তার আগে 5 বছর আমি মৈহারে আচার্য আলাউদ্দিন খান সাহেবের কাছে শিক্ষা করতাম সরল।
Timir Baran was learning the sarod from Ustad Alauddin Khan. He had what he called a family orchestra, as the performers were closely related to him.
অনুপ্রেরণা পেয়ে আমি আমার বাড়িতে কলকাতায় যখন এসেছিলাম, এসে আমার ফ্যামিলি অর্কেস্ট্রা করলাম। তাছাড়া দু একজন বাইরের লোকও ছিলেন এবং তাতে আমি বেশ আনন্দও পেয়েছিলাম। এমন সময় উদয় শঙ্কর কলকাতায় ভারতে এলেন এবং কলকাতায় এলেন। তিনি ভারতের সব জায়গায় ঘুরে অনেক বাদ্যযন্ত্র কিনেছিলেন, নিয়ে এসেছিলেন। একদিন ওর একটা বাড়িতে তিনি সেগুলো সাজিয়ে রেখেছিলেন, কিন্তু বাদ্যযন্ত্র হয়ে কী হবে, সব শিক্ষা দেবার কেউ লোক ছিল না। তার ভাইরা ছিলেন এবং আরও দু একজন ছিল, তারা সচেতন 8 জন নিয়ে আমি অর্কেস্ট্রা করবো এই ঠিক ছিল। তারপর উদয়শঙ্কর আমার এই
Timir Baran invited Uday Shankar to listen to his orchestra. Shankar heard him and asked Timir Baran to compose the music for his dance. The result was most gratifying. Shankar promptly engaged Timir Baran as his music director and asked him to prepare for a visit to Europe. Earlier in Paris, Shankar had already met Vishnudas Shirali, an unknown struggling musician who also became his co-music director. In October 1930, the group left for Paris. The youngest of them all was
Anything
Robindra.
about Dada Uday Shankar is rather difficult, because he was not only my elder brother, almost 20 years elder than me, but at the same time he was like my guru, my friend, all rolled into one. My first memory of Paris, this was when I was about 10, in year 1930. This was winter. We all went to Paris and stayed in a house there. My mother, my 2 brothers, Rajendra and Devendra, my first cousin, Kanaklata, my 2 uncles, and few other musicians, including Timir Baran, who was the music director, and Another outstanding musician joined us in Paris, Vishnudas Sirali, who became the co-music director. And being at that young age, coming all of a sudden from Benares to Paris was such an excitement for me. And not only that, being in this whole aura of dance, music, painting, costumes, being made ready for this preparation, and immediately starting learning dancing, that was the main thing at that time. I was in such excitement. And Dada at that time was, to me, I mean, for years and years altogether, he was like a superstar, like a hero. And what was also very unusual for me to be thrown all of a sudden in a country where I couldn't understand the language, so I had to be in a school for some time. But at home it was all the time work and work and work. Basically I started as a dancer under the guidance of Dada. But I used to tamper with different musical instruments which was all there, but nothing seriously really. Of course at that time I didn't realize, but now when I think of it, I am amazed to even fathom the whole greatness and the genius of that person who, in spite of not having been trained into any particular classical Indian form of dancing, how he could create a whole new style of his own, which was not at all Western, which was basically Indian, because it had everything from Indian soil. I'm starting from the classical Kathakali, Bharatanatyam, Manipuri, and then a lot of tribal dancing, aborigines, folk dancing, and how he could combine all that and make a style of his own, the whole technique, and how he could convey a story through mime and certain mudras taken from Kathakali, but do it so successfully. He was the pioneer, of course. Pioneer not only in the sense of as a dancer, but he brought best musicians from India, including Baba, Ustad Alauddin, my guru. But what he did at that time was so new, such innovation, that one has really not yet evaluated properly. And I happened to be with him for 8 years continuously. And of course, after that, I changed my whole career from dancer to musician. We had a lovely house there with a huge hall for work. My mother was in charge of the kitchen, and I remember we used to work 12 to 16 hours per day sometimes. It was work, work, work. Dada teaching everyone, music being composed. There were hundreds and thousands of yards of cloth material, costumes being made, jewelries. And Alice Bona, who was a great friend of Dada, was in charge of all this artistic side, costumes especially. And then of course, beautiful dancing partner of Dada, Simki, was there. So we used to work all the time, new dances being created, and then we had our first performance in month of March 1931 in Théâtre Champs-Élysées.
It was a resounding success. The last item of the program was Tandav Nritya by Shankar, Simki, Devendra and Konoklava. This was in fact Shankar's first attempt at what later came to be identified as ballet in the Indian context. It is here also that the seed of what later came to be known as the Uday Shankar style was sown. Shankar evolved his own system of exercise, his own pattern of movement, his own steps and gaits, and his own manner of choreography. And what Uday Shankar did next was not only unexpected, but quite astonishing. He made Kalpana, a full-length feature film in 1947 through dance. During his days in Europe in the 20s, Uday Shankar had learned to some extent the art of filmmaking.
गरीबों का दो ये मेरी फैक्ट्री मेरा कारोबार मैं इन निकम्मे मजदूरों लोहे की पेशियों और इस्पात के पहियों में बदल देना चाहता हूँ मैं इन्हें मशीन बना देना चाहता हूँ
Technically, the film is daringly original and a visual delight. It is a fine blend of imagination and realism, of artistry and technique. Shankar's experience as a painter proved useful here in set designing and clever framing of shots.
धीरज रखो अभी वक्त नहीं आया
It was a film that appeared much ahead of its time, but as a commercial venture it failed. The cost, 22 lakhs of rupees, was too high for those days.
मशीन ही चलानी नहीं बल्कि मशीन की तरह काम करना है मशीन की तरह काम करना है
After Kalpana, Uday Shankar again returned to the world of dance with his wife Amala by his side. And they had a tiny son, Anundu, who now has become a creative artist in his own right.
Talking about my father has always been I won't say a problem, but I really don't know where to start and where to end because there is so much to talk about him. And here I have a responsibility to talk about him as a son talking about a father, and at the same time as a junior artist talking about the Uday Shankar. About my relation with him as a father, or not only my relation with him as a father, or everybody he came in contact, is something which I'm sure nobody will forget because it's something so memorable. He was a friend to everybody. You could go and talk to him about anything. He was very lovable, had great sense of humor. He always loved teasing people, joking with people. He wanted to see people happy all around him. But when it came to work or discipline, he was like an army general or a tyrant, you can say, means absolutely like a dictator. There was no compromise. And I think that has been a great thing in my life, and not only in my life, but I think anybody who came in contact with him, close contact with him. There are so many incidents which I remember about him, and these have really been a big thing in my life, in my work, in my outlook on life. For instance, he represented India abroad. But when we came to know him personally, when we talked to him, he was really not a scholarly person in the sense of, being able to give some slokas in Sanskrit or talk about Kathak or Manipuri or our literature and things like that. But somehow there was something in him which was great, that he got the spirit of India in him.
In the 50s, Shankar's major contribution was Life of Buddha. It was a shadow play with more effects and colors on the screen, done by Amala Shankar, who painted scenes on glass slides that were projected on the screen. His next ballet, Samanno Khoti, was based on a theme by Tagore. Uday Shankar was getting old, but the creative mind was as active as ever. In 1968, during his tour of America, Uday Shankar suffered a stroke, but he refused to be broken in spirit. As soon as he gathered strength, he started work on his next production, his last, Shankarscope. It was a spectacle which employed an ingenious amalgam of the stage and the screen. Actors appear on the stage and disappear. They merge with images on the screen. Shankarscope was made purely for entertainment. With Shankarscope, the chapter of Uday Shankar's dancing days ended. And on September 26, in 1977, the dancer passed away. But his style continues through his wife Amala and their worthy daughter Mamata. master used to say, "When I dance, I'm nearer to God. The stage is more than a temple to me." And now when he is no more, he is nearer to us.